Why do great nations fail? It's a question that's been asked forever. But what if the answer isn't some big, dramatic collapse, but more like a slow, creeping illness? Today, we're diving into Mancur Olson's powerful theory that suggests the very success and stability of a nation might actually be the thing that slowly grinds it to a halt. So here's the mystery that had economists scratching their heads for decades. After World War II, the world just seemed upside down. You had nations that were literally bombed into rubble, and they just roared back to life with these economic miracles. Meanwhile, the victorious nations, they started to slow down, to stagnate. It just didn't make any sense. What on earth was going on? And the numbers from that first decade after the war, they're just wild. Look at this. West Germany and Japan, coming from absolute devastation, were posting growth rates over 6%. At the same time, the UK and the US, the victors, were barely even in the same league. We're not talking about a small gap here. This was a chasm. Now, this wasn't just a blip on some chart. This was a really deep and persistent puzzle. The simple explanations like, oh, they were just rebuilding. Well, they didn't really hold up because these countries kept rocketing forward even after they'd recovered to their pre-war levels. So something else had to be going on. This is where Mancur Olson comes in. He argued that we were all looking in the wrong place. The answer, he said, isn't in culture or national character or natural resources. No, the real clue is hidden in something much more basic, the fundamental logic of how groups of people actually work together, or, more often, how they don't. And that brings us right to the heart of his entire theory, the logic of the group. It all starts with this idea he calls a collective good. Think about it this way. If a union fights for and wins a higher wage, every worker in that job gets the raise. Or if a lobby gets a new regulation passed, every company in that industry benefits. The key thing is you can't exclude anyone from enjoying the benefit, even the people who did absolutely nothing to help get it. Okay, but right there, that creates a massive problem, a really interesting paradox. When everyone stands to gain from something, a very rational, very human question pops into your head. I mean, seriously, why would you spend your time and your money to go lobby for something or join a protest when you're just one person in a group of millions? Your individual effort feels like a drop in the bucket, but the cost to you is very real. And meanwhile, the reward gets shared with everybody, including all the people who just sat on their couch. And this, right here, is what Olson famously called the free rider problem. In any big group, it is perfectly logical to just let someone else do the hard work. The problem is, everyone else is thinking the exact same thing. And the result is that huge, scattered groups, think all consumers or all taxpayers, find it almost impossible to organize and fight for their common interests. But we know some groups do manage to organize. So which ones actually succeed and why? This is where the theory gets really powerful. It turns out small, concentrated groups have a massive advantage. I mean, if you're one of only, say, 5 big steel companies, it's pretty easy to get together, make a deal, and keep an eye on each other. Your personal share of the prize is big enough to make the effort worthwhile. But for those huge, widespread groups, that free rider logic kicks in, and they end up silent and powerless. And that creates a huge imbalance of power in society. Olson had a special name for these powerful little groups, distributional coalitions. We're talking about lobbies, professional associations, cartels, you name it. And their goal isn't to grow the whole economic pie. Nope. Their goal is to use their organized power to carve out a bigger slice of the pie for themselves, even if it means the entire pie actually shrinks a little in the process. And this is where we get to the really devastating paradox at the heart of this whole theory. Olson argued that the very things we all want, long periods of peace, stability, prosperity, are the things that ultimately cause a nation's economic arteries to clog up and harden. And it happens in this predictable cycle. First, a country enjoys a long, stable period. This gives all those special interest groups the time they need to form and get organized. Second, these groups just start to accumulate, like barnacles on the hull of a ship, each one adding a tiny bit of drag. Third, society gets gummed up. Each group gets its own special rules and protections, creating this tangled mess of regulations. And finally, the economy just starts to seize up. Dynamism fades, new ideas get blocked, and the nation develops what Olson called economic sclerosis. The economist Edward Glaser summed it up perfectly. He said, peaceful prosperity leads to the emergence of interest groups, which use the tools of government for their own ends. Ultimately, their efforts stifle economic dynamism. It's this tragic, slow-motion feedback loop. Okay,
So let's take this idea, this framework, and go all the way back to our original mystery. Because once you look at that weird post-war data through Olson's eyes, everything suddenly snaps into focus.
And here it is, the answer. For Germany and Japan, the utter devastation of the war basically acted like a giant forest fire. It just burned away the entire undergrowth of old, entrenched special interest groups. It wiped their institutional slate clean. And that left their economies incredibly flexible and open, ready to grab new technologies and grow like crazy. But Britain won the war. Its institutions and its centuries-old collection of barnacles were all perfectly intact. It was suffering from an advanced case of economic sclerosis, which made the whole country rigid and slow to change.
Now, I know this all might sound like it's from a history book, but Olson's theory, which he wrote back in 1982, feels shockingly relevant today. It makes you ask a really uncomfortable question. Are we seeing these same symptoms right now?
Just look around at the symptoms in many developed economies today. You have well-organized homeowner groups blocking new housing that would benefit the much larger but unorganized group of people who need a place to live. We see this explosion of occupational licensing rules that are really just there to protect insiders from new competition. We see complex regulations that benefit existing players. And we're seeing falling rates of new business creation. These are all classic, textbook signs of the economic sclerosis that Olson warned us about. And this is where it all comes from. These powerful and, let's be honest, kind of unsettling ideas. Olson's 1982 masterpiece gives us a lens to understand not just the past, but the really tough economic challenges we are wrestling with right now. So, we end on this final, massive question. If Olson is right, if peace and prosperity themselves create the perfect conditions for stagnation, what does that mean for our future? It's a profound challenge. It suggests that the very success we all work so hard for requires this constant vigilance against that slow, creeping decay of economic sclerosis.